Welcome back. We're getting right to some talking points in our next panel. We'll start with the state's looming budget crisis. Here to break it all down are CBSN New York's urban affairs expert Mark Peters and Javier Lacayo, a vice president at SKD Knickerbocker. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us today. And I think
good to be here.
What you need to do is, Mark, I think we need to talk about the fact that it's a looming budget gap. And what's the philosophy of being a tax and spend state as opposed to tightening our belt and realizing we can't do everything for everyone?
Well, look, obviously we shouldn't be spending money needlessly, but at the same time, New York is never going to compete with places like Florida as a low-tax, low-cost state. And so New York needs to play to its strengths, which is providing these
So you're saying taxes? Javier, I mean, are you saying we're going to see taxes? One thing we have to say is that Andrea Stewart-Cousins, because it's an election year, did everything like a twisted pretzel to avoid saying we're going to look at taxes. Do you think that's real world?
I think the reality is that the progressive majority now in the state Senate is facing a real challenge, right? Can they balance the progressive reforms that they want to do with fiscally responsible governance? And I think it's possible. I think that you're going to see pressure in the Assembly, right? Carl Hastie is going to have a seat at this table.
Taxes or no taxes?
For the taxes. I think that there's...
Mark, you think there's going to be taxes?
Well, I don't know whether there will be taxes because there's a lot of pressure on Majority Leader Stewart-Cousins to not have any taxes. But I also think given the $6 billion deficit, given that the two biggest points of state spending are education and health care, I think they may really have to consider it this time.
I completely
Look into your crystal ball. You see taxes? What do you see?
I think so, because I also think that, we're not talking about middle-class taxes here. We're not talking about a tax rate that would impact most New Yorkers. We're talking about taxes like the mansion tax, like the pied-à-terre tax, the millionaire's tax, the stock transfer tax. These are things that most New Yorkers...
Won't those drive people out of New York?
Well, I don't know that to agree with Javier for a second. I think you can assume that an actual increase in income taxes is probably dead on arrival in the state Senate. But various other things like a mansion tax or a stock transfer tax.
Rich people can get up and move. So if you're going to tax, all those taxes that Javier talked about are rich people taxes.
People always say that rich people are going to get up and move. The reality is that rich people love New York City and New York State, and they're going to stay here even if they need to pay a little bit more in taxes.
Yeah, I agree. The data all suggest that there are more rich people coming into New York. New York City's population is going up than are fleeing New York. So I think, in fact, some of these taxes are ultimately going to have to be on the table.
So I want to change the subject because I have to say that I was surprised that Andrea Stewart-Cousins said that she's willing to change criminal justice reform to maybe include a carve-out for public safety. How did you guys react to that? I
was surprised that she'd said that because she sort of refused to go there previously, and she sort of clearly didn't want to have to go there. But I think that the weight of circumstances is such that we're going to have to consider some kind of changes to bail reform.
Is real-world change to criminal justice something you can see the legislature doing this year?
Look, I think it's certainly going to be a topic of discussion. I think, though, it's important to get the facts straight about this particular reform. My understanding is that there is already protections for judges to impose certain types of restrictions like electronic monitoring or supervision in cases where they think there's a significant risk of flight.
Yeah, but that doesn't work. That doesn't work, unfortunately. I mean, having spent a lot of time in law enforcement, electronic monitoring is not anything like a substitute, especially when you have somebody who is dangerous to the community. And every other state, or most other states that have done this, have created that carve-out so that we don't have people go out, punch somebody in the face, get out that day, the next day punch somebody else in the face. And electronic monitoring isn't going to protect you from that.
Absolutely. But I think we also need to consider the effects of keeping folks incarcerated pre-trial, right? There's data that shows that actually the longer you keep someone in jail, that could actually make the community unsafer in different ways, right? You are criminalizing people. Folks can lose a job while they're, waiting to post bail, and that can sort of lead to an entire cycle of criminalization. I'm not disagreeing with you, Mark. I think that there's really important considerations here, but I think that there's two sides of this coin.
Well, except that, and I agree with you that clearly we don't want to hold people in jail when we don't have to. But there's no reason to believe that if you give judges the ability to keep people who are dangerous incarcerated, that's going to lead to the huge number of additional people being incarcerated. I think that this is just a fairly common sense public safety concern that the legislature is going to have to take on.
I absolutely agree. And what I would just say is that as the legislature sort of continues considering that they don't pump the brakes on other criminal justice reforms that can still move the needle forward, still create other forms of cost savings, right? There's always going to be this reflex reaction from the law enforcement community whenever these types of criminal justice reforms are passed. But
yet other states, including New Jersey, which is right next door, do have this criminal justice carve out, so that it gives judges, I hate to use the word cover, but it gives them cover for setting bail, even though we have these reduced standards. And the question is whether this legislature will go for it.
I think that they're going to have to seriously consider it. I mean, you saw Majority Leader Stuart Cousins, who's previously not wanted to go in this direction, finally having to say, yes, of course we'll consider it, because we're going to see these kinds of issues happening again and again.
So let's turn to hate crimes. Earlier this week, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries had something to say. Let's hear what he had to say.
We want to say to anybody who's contemplating an anti-Semitic act, cut it out. You will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. You will be ostracized, you will be punished, you will be held accountable.
So the congressman says, cut it out, you will be prosecuted, leading to the question, do we need a special prosecutor to handle all the hate crime cases in the state?
Yeah, I certainly think that it's an important consideration for lawmakers right now. What we're seeing right now is that these anti-Semitic hate crimes are not happening in a vacuum. This is part of a larger trend of hate crimes going up against Latinos, against the LGBT. I think the FBI just released a report in November saying that we're at a 16-year national high for hate crimes. And New York, as a progressive beacon, has a responsibility to be a leader here and to take these seriously.
I agree, although what concerns me is, although we've been talking about hate crimes a lot in the last couple of weeks, the increase in hate crimes, and in particular in anti-Semitic crimes, has been going on for months. In fact, police data that some of your reporting actually found suggested as early as last spring that this was a problem. And so the concern I have is, why is it the city is only now starting to take this seriously when we've known for months and months that this was a problem that was building?
Absolutely. And I think that's a serious question for city leaders, because I don't think that it's something that has even just started this year. It's something that we've seen really grow over the last couple of years, and in my view, sort of since the rise of Trump.
But you see, it's not just anti-Semitic hate crimes. If you take a look at the numbers, there's a huge category of hate crimes. You know, there's hate crimes against people who are Black, Hispanic, gay. There's a lot of hate unleashed. And, have we reached the point, I know you've been a prosecutor, have we reached the point where we need somebody who's going to take a look at the whole issue and make sure that the prosecutions are fair and even?
I mean, I think that there's a really compelling argument for a statewide special prosecutor here, although I do want to say that most of the DAs who've been involved in this are very competent professional people who I've got a lot of confidence in. But certainly some kind of uniformity is sometimes helpful.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have. I want to thank you guys for joining us. It was great today. And we would like to give you a chance to share your point unfiltered. Now, to do that, record a video on your cell phone and send it to our Facebook page, or hashtag your point on Twitter at CBS New York. Be sure to check our social media pages for the topic of the week. I'm Marcia Kramer. I'll see you again next week.